Running on Air by 11t7. Chapter 9, Part 2. Space and time are always unstable when it comes to magic, Hermione says, drinking her third cup of tea. Space, yes. That's why they advise avoiding disapparating over long distances, but especially time. It's dangerously unstable, and it works on similar principles to space. Traveling over large areas of time is very dangerous.
But where will he get a time turner from?
Ron interrupts.
They were all destroyed by the Ministry, remember?
I don't know, Ron, but it's a possibility. Hermione sets her mug of tea back down. I can't believe I didn't think of it before. When you disapparate and something goes wrong, you get splinched, and the same thing happens when you use a time turner incorrectly. Ron winces.
Malfoy splinched between two dimensions.
Sort of. He doesn't exist completely in either space, but he doesn't not exist either.
That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't need to make sense,
Harry says, pacing in front of the fire.
Hermione, how do we fix this?
She shakes her head. I'll need to research it. Perhaps talk to some unspeakables. They know about this sort of magic, but Harry, you must know that there's only 3 recorded cases of this happening. It's so rare to diagnose because nobody ever knows. Someone's usually secretly using a time turner, and one day they just vanish and that's it. But of the 3 recorded cases...
Yes?
Harry asks impatiently. Hermione looks down at the book in her lap. Each one required a time turner to rescue the trapped person, she says quietly. And not just any time turner, but the same one the person used to travel to the other time.
Impossible,
Ron says, but Hermione shakes her head. In 2 of the cases, the person placed the time turner somewhere safe, where it could be found and used by the rescuers in the future.
Brilliant, so we'll just...
Hermione shakes her head. The rescuers had to spend months figuring it out. The time travelers had to abide by the rules of causality. They were not able to tell anyone how or where they were placed, or even where in time they were.
Draco couldn't,
Harry says suddenly. It all makes so much sense in hindsight.
He tried, but...
Hermione nods. Trying to break the rules of causality would be like trying to disapparate to 2 different places at once. Ron winces again. Harry stares into the flame of the fire.
So, all I have to do,
he says quietly,
is find the time turner.
Well, there's a lot of complicated magic involved, but it's somewhere for you to start, yes, Hermione says. Find a time turner, and we'll do some research.
We?
Ron repeats gloomily. You do want to help, don't you? Hermione says.
Only because Harry's right pain when he's obsessing with Malfoy,
Ron says, sliding off the sofa and ambling towards Hermione's library room. Harry's too distracted to reflect on that particular remark. He looks at Hermione.
How'd you figure this all out, anyway?
She smiles faintly. Running on air.
What?
Running on air. You said being in Draco's head was like running on air. She pauses. The first person who ever used to time travel, a witch in the 17th century, said that traveling through time was like running on air.
You remember that?
Hermione smiles. Yes. Now go and get some rest. But that night he dreams of the river again, the road, and Draco's driving on, and Harry thinks he'll stay there forever. It had been difficult to arrange everyone's schedules to coordinate, but here they are. Astoria's pacing in the kitchen. She makes another pot of tea before Matthew gently reminds her that she's already made one. She's late, Astoria says, turning to Harry. Just tell me, please. Have you found Draco?
I'd like to wait for Narcissa,
he says, and Astoria bites her lip hard and looks away. 3 years, she says. 3 years. Merlin, I just want it to be over. never really stopped searching. The faint pop of someone apparating. Matthew, calm and steady, standing by the warm fireplace like an immovable rock, speaks just as Astoria begins to rush away.
Harry, why don't you get the door?
I'll answer it. This is my house. Astoria protests, but Matthew shakes his head, and Astoria falls back, allowing Harry to disappear down the hallway. Narcissa looks quite formidable, Harry thinks when he opens the door. Dressed in heavy and formal robes, string of pearls about her neck, and her hair elaborately styled. Looks at Harry with a look of undisguised anxiety, however.
Draco, come in, and I'd like to talk to everyone at the same time,
Harry says, and Narcissa quickly follows him inside. Astoria greets Narcissa with a perfunctory hello, but both women's eyes are trained on Harry. It would be cruel to make them wait any longer. He takes a breath.
Did Draco ever have a time turner?
Their reactions tell him everything he needs to know. Astoria blinks, looking completely bewildered. Narcissa begins to shake her head, and then a flash of realization, and then fear crosses her face.
Narcissa,
Harry says, and Astoria starts and turns to Narcissa. Draco had a time turner? Astoria demands, her expression accusing. You.
It's all right, Harry says quickly. Narcissa, if you know anything about this, you need to tell me right now. I think Draco's used a time turner and something's gone terribly wrong.
He's been trapped in time for 3 years? Astoria says, staring at Narcissa.
Astoria?
Matthew says quietly. She glances at him but doesn't respond. Narcissa looks at Astoria as well, and then stares at Harry.
Draco never had a time turner,
she says, one hand reaching for a necklace.
but Lucius did.
Astoria opens her mouth, but then looks across at Matthew and seems to catch an unspoken reassurance. She moves closer to him, and he puts an arm around her shoulders. Narcissa gazes unmovingly into the fire.
Lucius spent nearly all the family fortune acquiring it.
Narcissa continues.
It was madness, but he could not be dissuaded. He had already fled to Crete by then, but he frequently visited us to speak of his future plans. And he and Draco used a time turner,
Harry says quietly, and Narcissa glances at him sharply, her gaze refocusing.
No,
she says, sounding scandalized.
Draco would never use it, never. He'd said something to Lucius in an argument about using a time turner once.
That last memory of Narcissa's, Harry recalls.
If you want to protect your family, father, I suggest investing in a time turner and reconsidering some key choices you made 12 years ago. And Lucius seemed to be obsessed with returning in time to alter certain choices. But Draco, he was horrified when he found out about it. I know Draco wanted to return to the past,
Harry says, thinking of the letters he'd found in Draco's diary.
Do you remember when we were 11? Let's go back to that.
But Narcissa shakes her head firmly.
No.
Draco regretted many things, but he made it very clear the past should never be revisited. The more Lucius spoke of using the time turner, the more Draco argued about the danger of it and criticized Lucius' obsession with the past. She hesitates, then glances away.
In the end,
she says so quietly that Harry has to lean forward to hear her.
Draco said that if Lucius insisted on this madness, he would report him to the authorities. In the end, Draco
took the time turner and transfigured it, to disguise it. He refused to tell his father where it was. Astoria moved suddenly. When Harry looks at her, her arms are crossed and her expression is indecipherable.
And then, what happened?
Harry asks. Narcissa's mouth trembles slightly, but she speaks clearly.
Draco disappeared. This time, Astoria speaks.
How could you? I was worried sick. I was a complete mess when Draco disappeared, and you knew?
I didn't, Narcissa says, looking distraught. When Draco first disappeared, I had no idea. I owed Lucius thinking perhaps Draco had gone to Crete after all. But Lucius said he had no idea where Draco was. She's twisting her necklace so hard in her hands that Harry thinks the string will snap and send pearls rolling everywhere. Then, 3 months after Draco disappeared, Lucius wrote to say Draco was arranging a meeting with him. Lucius was pleased. That Draco had come to see the error of his ways and wanted to join him after all. Well, you didn't think that that was the purpose of the meeting? Harry says, watching Narcissa closely. Narcissa shook her head. No, I had a feeling Draco was going to stage a meeting, then call the Auras with his father's location.
You don't know Draco, Astoria says suddenly. You don't know what he was going to do.
I know Draco better than you think, Narcissa retorts, looking at her. I know your engagement was false. Draco only did it to please me. She looks away again. Secrecy and silence, Harry thinks. Only everyone had been honest with each other. I think I know what happened, Harry says quietly, and both Astoria and Narcissa turn to look at him. I think you're right, Narcissa. Draco left voluntarily for 3 months. He decided to return and report Lucius' whereabouts. On the morning of Lucius' capture, an anonymous tip-off told us his location. Well, I think perhaps Lucius realized what Draco was going to do and tried to take both of them back into the past. And then it went terribly wrong. Can imagine the struggle all too well. Perhaps the time turner broke or slipped, but either way, only Draco was taken into the past while Lucius remained behind. In the ensuing chaos, as Auras arrived, Lucius didn't have the chance to tell anyone what happened before he was killed.
Oh, Merlin! Oh, no! Astoria says, looking pale and wretched. No. All this time and Draco's been stuck in the past somewhere?
She begins to cry. It's strange to see her cry, bright, breezy Astoria always smiling, and Harry looks away, uncomfortably, as Matthew soothes her. Narcissa doesn't cry. She stares into the heart of the fireplace at the bright flames flickering behind the grate, and her eyes are dry. All she ever wanted was her family to be complete, to be together again, and Harry's heart suddenly aches for her. If Draco had the time turner somewhere in the past, he says, do you have any idea where it might be? Perhaps a favorite place in the manor or a hidden area he's sometimes used? Narcissa shakes her head. I'm sorry, she says. I don't even know what it was transfigured into. Harry nods and tries to think of something optimistic to say. He can't. He spends the next weeks going through the old files, rereading the details of Lucius' capture and death over and over. There was a ministry commission into the death, of course, and that required a coroner's report. A full list of all clothing and items found on Lucius at the time of death. And there is nothing listed to suggest a transfigured artifact. Lucius only had his wand and a small bag of galleons. Harry disapparates to the location where Lucius was captured and tries to accio the time-turner to no avail. Perhaps Draco left it behind. Perhaps he dropped it just before vanishing. It could be a possibility, Hermione tells Harry, but her voice is doubtful. Still, he searches. Winter slowly melts into spring. Ginny sends Harry a postcard from France where she's visiting the French national team to gauge their performance. A letter follows soon after. She's purchased a studio apartment closer to central London. You'd be surprised, or perhaps not, at how much international Quidditch players earn, she writes. My finances are in good order, So if you'd like to move back to the Westminster apartment, it's fine. I'm not fussed if you don't sell it. I suppose we should transform ownership unless you're happy to co-own it. I hear the rental market is steady at the moment.
He feels as though he's outstaying his welcome at Ron's and Hermione's home, although he'd never dare to tell them that. He can only imagine the wrath and indignation it would invoke. He's been there since Christmas, and it's March now. So he moves back to the apartment, convincing Ron and Hermione that, yes, he honestly wants to be there. He'd like a little space right now, and he's grateful for the first time that neither he nor Ginny really moved into the apartment to begin with. There is no memories to deal with, or possessions to remove. It's as bland and impersonal as he ever remembered it. It will do as a temporary base until he finds his home. The home he always wanted. The home he spent his whole life looking for.
It's a nice view, but this isn't you, is it, Potter? This is nothing, a concrete box in the sky. You need something grounded, something real.
The first night he moves back into the apartment, he stands by the kitchen counter and remembers how Draco stood there once, a small Christmas tree casting light over his face.
I'm sorry,
Harry says, and his words echo across the white walls, the polished floorboards.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
It sounds an awful lot like the sound of defeat. To be continued.